There are two really big questions we don't know the answers to tonight. The first one is whether those American bombing raids on Iran's nuclear facilities actually obliterated them, as President Trump claims. There is no evidence. For the time being, there can't be. No outsiders are going in for a very long time, and that raises the possibility of a humiliated, furious Iranian regime no longer talking to the international atomic energy establishment and quietly tucking away enriched uranium for dirty bombs, which they'll one day lob at Israel. Is that tolerable? This war has begun, but I'm afraid it has not ended. And the second question is the obvious one, which is how will Iran respond? David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, was again this afternoon calling on Iran to find an off-ramp and begin to negotiate seriously. That would be wonderful, but they don't seem to be listening. The Iranian parliament, which does what it's told, has voted to close the Straits of Hormuz and trigger a global economic shock. On this show last week, a professor from Tehran was suggesting multiple strikes against US bases across the Middle East.
If there is conflict, the Iranians will hit very hard. And you have to keep in mind that tiny Arab family regimes, they are hosting these US bases. And Iranians consider them to be, or would consider them to be complicit in case of any hostility.
So in a sense,
therefore,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but so in a sense, countries like Dubai and Abu Dhabi and others should expect to be attacked if this goes into a full-scale war between Iran and the United States.
Yes, wherever there are American assets, American bases, I think that's very clear, that the Iranians have made that very clear.
Now, one of those tiny Arab family regimes hosting an enormous American base is Qatar. And tonight it has closed its airspace, and the Foreign Office is telling British citizens in Qatar to take shelter. Ominous. And indeed, the regime in Tehran has confirmed they did attack Qatar. So we need, don't we, someone who knows Iran very well. Jack Straw, who was Foreign Secretary at the time of the Iraq War, was the first senior British minister nearly a quarter of a century ago to visit Iran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. And among his books is The English Job, Understanding Iran and Why It Mistrusts Britain. And he joins me now. Jack, great to have you on the show. First of all, your reaction to what we just heard about the attack on Qatar. This war is not going to end with those American attacks, is it? It's going to spread. Is spreading.
No, it's not. And I think that it's because the regime, in your words, feels humiliated. And they're now just trying to strike out in any way they can. It's not a rational response, but this regime has not been very rational for a number of years. At the head of the regime is Ayatollah Khamenei, who's 86. He's in poor health. He's got a gammy right arm, which he lost the use of back in 1981 when he was the subject of a failed assassination attempt. He's never been outside the country at all in the over 30 years that he's been supreme leader. He's surrounded these days by acolytes who will be telling him things that he wants to hear. He's deeply bitter. He hates Israel with a completely irrational hatred for reasons which few people, even in Iran, understand. And then you've got around him his Praetorian Guard, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, who are themselves will be pretty desperate, because they know that if there is regime change, unless they're part of it, which is possible in Iran, that the game will be up for them. So they are now striking out. I mean, and I think we are likely to expect more of this as the Iranians try to show that they have the power which they said they had going back 2 to 3 years ago, when they had this apparently impenetrable defensive strategy using proxies in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Israel, as well as the Houthis, who are still in business in the Red Sea.
Sorry, Jack.
That's all been undermined as a result of actions which have happened over the last 2 to 3 years.
So would you expect other Gulf countries, other Gulf statelets, and the Americans in Iraq and elsewhere to be under attack in due course as well? In other words, are they going to be lashing out in every direction they can?
Well, I think that's a possibility. I mean, it'd be crackers of them to do so, but this is a regime which has not behaved rationally, as I've said, for quite a number of years. And what you've had, by the way, underneath the Supreme Leader and his entourage, you've had the kind of semblance of a normal government with an elected president and foreign minister and so on. But whereas in the past, that elected, sometimes fair elections, sometimes and often not, elected government had a fair amount of leeway. In recent years, it's got had very little leeway indeed, and I think that's the case now. So I think what you have to hang on to the fact you've got this 86-year-old man, almost certainly in a bunker, directing these efforts and placing his whole country at risk.
And what about the possibility? I mean, I think a lot of people would agree that Iran must not have a nuclear weapon, certainly under this regime and given its views on Israel. But is it possible we are now in a worse position than we were before if the enriched uranium has been moved somewhere else, has been moved around the country, and they are now able to put together some kind of dirty bomb at a time when they have left the international negotiations and won't let in the IAEA inspectors?
Well, it's possible. I mean, I fervently hoped that there would be a negotiated way through this, which is, after all, what President Trump was talking about. And historians may say, in some years hence, that using these great buster bombs on the nuclear facilities in Isfahan, Fordo, and Natanz was premature. But anyway, where we are is where we are. But overall, I suspect that the risk from Iran is less than it could have been had Iran progressed to getting a nuclear weapon. And let us be clear about this, that Iran was actively moving towards a nuclear weapon system until 2003, when I got involved in negotiations with my French and German counterparts, which led, after 12 very protracted years of negotiation, to the so-called JCPOA, that agreement which President Obama signed and then Donald Trump pulled out of in 2018. But all that time, Iran has been carrying on enriching uranium, and particularly since Donald Trump pulled out of the JCPOA, they've been re-enriching it, going towards
a bomb.
Yes,
you used the word. Sorry, Jack. Used the word premature there. We had conversations. I remember them very well at the time of the Iraq War, and some people are saying there are parallels here. There isn't really international legal cover for what the Americans have done because the threat was not imminent, even if it was there. What's your view about the legality of all of this?
Well, I'm not a member of the British government these days. What I do know from that period is it's for each country, if it's contemplating taking military action, as the United States have, to make that legal judgment themselves. And the US has always had a broader idea of what is legal for it to do than, for example, European countries have done. And if you go back to the Vietnam War, there wasn't actually much case for saying that the United States' interests were being threatened by what was happening in North Vietnam. But nonetheless, the US intervened, and in the end, they had hundreds of thousands of troops there.
Does that suggest to you that this time round we're right to try and stay out of this if we possibly can? You know, your successor David Lammy has been asked repeatedly, does he think this is legal or not? And he hasn't answered, and I presume he hasn't answered because he thinks the answer is probably no.
I doubt it. I mean, the answer, it's impossible for anybody in the UK government to second guess what the American government have been advised. But when we were in the lead up to the what became the Iraq War. I'm talking about 2002, and the issue was, did we get a Security Council resolution? I remember talking to my then opposite number, Colin Powell, and saying that without the resolution, we'd have really serious difficulties with our lawyers and the Attorney General if there was going to be a war. And Colin quipped, but he was telling the truth. He said, well, if we're faced with that situation, our answer is to get a different lawyer. So they do just have a different view of it. And I don't blame David Islamic for saying that he can't second guess what the Americans have been told.
Finally, we just heard that President Trump is now in the Situation Room, presumably assessing the attack on American interests in Doha. How dangerous a moment is that? What kind of American response would you expect at this point?
I just thought that what the Americans will do in the light of this attack is to attack back. And what is, frankly, so stupid of the Iranians is for them to believe that they have any effective deterrent to the combined power of both the Americans and the Israelis. And at some stage, there will have to be some kind of negotiation. And what the Iranian leaders is doing at the moment is actually weakening Iran very profoundly. So it doesn't even need to be very sensible. I think it's understandable, given the personality of the supreme leader.
But not sensible. Really interesting, Jack Straw. Thank you very much indeed for talking to me tonight. Now then, let's turn next to the question of how much damage the Americans have done and where that leaves Iran's nuclear weapons program. I'm joined by James Milnes, the former deputy commander of NATO Chemical, Biological, Radiological and Nuclear Task Force, who did a similar job also for the Ministry of Defence. James, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Can I ask, you've seen these photographs of small holes atop the major nuclear installation the Americans were trying to take out. Do you think we'll ever know whether it's actually destroyed, or is this something that's just going to be a mystery for months ahead?
I think the weapons will have caused significant damage. The real issue comes down to destruction of knowledge, and the nuclear knowledge that Iran has gained over the years cannot be destroyed by bunker-busting bombs. And I think that's going to be the real challenge moving forward, is how do you contain and control dispersed knowledge and capability when you can't actually send in investigators to actually analyse what is going on the ground.
And I've seen, I don't know if they're real or not, you never do these days, but I've seen images suggesting that huge quantity or large quantities of enriched uranium have been removed already and dispersed around the country by lorry, where they can presumably be weaponized in due course. In other words, it's going to be even harder to get a hand from the outside world to get a hand on this problem than it was before, perhaps.
I think so, and therein lies the absolute challenge that we all now face. Is that this wasn't necessarily just about nuclear, it's about the whole capability that they are threatening or wanting to develop. And actually the other CBRN issues that come around the edges of this programme. We've got to make sure that we can get to a negotiating table so that people can get in there to find out what is going on. Bombing the country is a military and a political statement. But to actually control and understand what's going on will require more than just a kinetic aerial assets.